Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Now you can catch our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, on breakthrough-ideas.com, which is our website. In fact, I encourage you to go there and sign up for our newsletter. It comes out once a week, and we give you a lot of different information about what's going on from the state level to the local level to even the national level. And the whole premise, by the way, behind Breakthrough Ideas is that most people would not vote for the politicians in charge right now if they understood the policies those politicians are imposing on them. So with my podcast and with everything else that we do here at Breakthrough Ideas, we aim to connect the dots on policy, politicians, and politics. So welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. We're going to be doing a few different segments this time. And the first one, of course, I want to tackle is inflation. Maybe it's because I just went to the grocery store this morning and I was looking for just some breakfast items and went to go buy some bacon. $8.99 a pound for bacon. Are you kidding me? I was flabbergasted. Bacon's kind of a staple in our house, but I was really shocked to find it that high, $8.99 a pound. I mean, I don't know about you, but I can remember when it was less than $5 a pound, and it wasn't that long ago that that's the case. When does this end? When will inflation end? When are we going to see an end to just the nightmare that we have? Well, we're not sure. I mean, actually, the Wall Street Journal kind of tackles this issue in an opinion piece today. And the title of the article was, "The Cost of Wishful Thinking on Inflation is Going Up Too." And it's an opinion piece written by Gerard Baker. And the subtitle says, "First, it wasn't real. Then it was transitory. Now we're told the Fed will cure it with just a few rate hikes." Is really that all it's going to take to cure inflation? Because when it came to the Jimmy Carter years, which I remember, I was a rising high schooler at that time, and I certainly remember inflationary costs back then. You know what took to get out of it? A massive recession for a couple years. And what did that do? Well, that put a lot of people on a different trajectory in their lifetime based on what they went through in those formative years coming out of high school, going into college. What did it mean for them? Well, in some cases, they became more cautious about the economy, which is a good thing. But in many cases, they also suffered from the repercussions of not getting a job right after graduation. So what's it going to take now? Well, we already know that we're kind of in a bear market when it comes to the stock market, and now we're headed towards possible recession. Back to the opinion piece, though, written by Mr. Baker. He writes, "You would think by now that informed by so many examples from history, we would be familiar with the stages of a policy disaster in the making. Calamitous wars and foreign policy misadventures, economic, fiscal, and regulatory blunders, costly social policy initiatives, almost all seem to follow the same pattern. First, denial, the refusal to accept the mounting evidence that we are on the wrong track. Next, complacency, even when the inconvenient facts are reluctantly acknowledged. A misplaced confidence that a small adjustment is all that is needed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. When that fails, the policymaker turns to wishful thinking. A doty insistence on expecting the best in the face of the worst. Everything will be all right. We have a plan premised on all the best possible assumptions. This is the terminal stage. At some point, the full extent of the catastrophe is evident." I'd say we're at that terminal stage. I think everybody understands that it is a catastrophe at this point. It's unbelievable how far we have hurt our economy in just simply less than 18 months of a Biden administration. Less than 18 months, and this is where we are. Now, some people say, oh, well, it's really not Biden's fault. This may have happened anyway. Well, here's the truth, folks. It didn't happen. It didn't happen when President Trump was in office. And it's only because of the Biden policies that we find ourselves in the same situation. So another good friends of ours are those people at Wire Points, and Ted Dabrowski and John Klinger are out with another article I encourage you all to read. It says, and in fact, it's just exactly what I was talking about. Your breakfast costs 45% more than it did 2 years ago. who is to blame for such sky-high inflation? Let's hear what Ted and John think. He says they write that the federal government has failed spectacularly to manage the risk of inflation. For many, that's no surprise, given the unprecedented government-enforced lockdowns, the trillions of dollars spent on bailouts, and a haphazard implementation of the green energy agenda. And why, this is a little thing from me coming in on this article, why is that important about energy? Well, because energy is a huge resource input to everything else that we do, everything else that we produce, we grow, we transport. Energy costs are very important to the final cost of any product. The article goes on with Ted, but it's not just national officials who are to blame. Thank you very much, Ted. Here in Illinois, state leadership has supported and even copied the same inflation-boosting policies occurring at the federal level. Pritzker, who has managed Illinois' COVID response via executive order. In fact, he just wrote his 28th executive order, in case you guys have forgotten that we're still under his emergency orders. Anyway, he's managed Illinois COVID response via executive order for more than 2 years, enforced and defended some of the nation's strictest lockdowns, except for his own family. And he and other Democratic leaders were some of the biggest cheerleaders of the federal bailouts and, in fact, got the ball rolling by making the first ask of Congress. And those same leaders have enacted one of the nation's most extreme green energy bills with little to no plan for how to execute them. Now, we've covered that a number of times on our podcast. We're going to continue to cover it because it is still a huge issue. And in fact, I believe you are aware of the fact that MISO, which supports central, southern, and even the northwest part of the state with supply of energy, they have already warned that they may have to enact emergency procedures this week in the wake of extreme temperatures. So this was all, known ahead of time that this was going to happen if they passed the Clean Energy Jobs Act, in which they did. So anyway, this goes on. We're going to show you a graphic here that Ted and John did, but it shows you bacon is up 38%. Beef is up 24% per pound. Eggs per dozen are up 75%. Coffee up 31%. Gasoline up 145%. Hourly earnings are only up 8%. So those least able to weather the storm of inflationary times, those who are making $15 an hour, $20 an hour, how can they afford these enormous increases in costs for basic necessities? Well, they can't. They can't. And when this starts to get worse, and it is getting worse, by the way, you're going to see a lot more people having to not being able to keep up with housing payments, not being able to keep up with insurance payments. People are going to start to get desperate. And in desperate times, people lose jobs, they lose their homes, they lose their cars, and they lose their hope. But this didn't have to be this way. But because of the Biden energy policies and because of their excessive spending at the federal government, this is where we're at. This is exactly where we're at. Going a little bit further, Wall Street Journal also had an article today. Gasoline tops $5 a gallon. I'm going to also put up a screenshot of their photo for you to look at. But there you can see it. There's Illinois, bright red. Of course, Indiana's not doing much worse. Than us. They're in the bright red spot too, so which means that the state gas price average is anywhere from $5.22 to $6.43 a gallon. Other parts of the country, you see basically the West Coast is at that same level. But our surrounding neighbors, Wisconsin, Michigan, Missouri, Iowa, they do not have as high prices. And so a lot of this, again, goes back to the high cost of gas here in the state of Illinois. Now, how could we even make things worse? Well, back to Joe Biden and federal policy. The way that you make things worse is that you provide more bailout money that fuels the economy unnecessarily, that creates further demand, that creates further inflationary prices. And you do this with borrowed money so that you have to just print more money and circulate it into the economy. And so here we go again. Joe Biden And this is a June 14th article from the Federalist. Why Biden's planned student loan bailout is completely unfair. So not only is it unfair, but it will also add to inflationary problems here in the United States. But this is an interesting article. I mean, I think that this is actually the hope and the prayer for some people who are paying on student loans. Some of these new graduates have enormous student loans, and they're actually hoping that Joe Biden bails them out. But I'm telling you, it's not fair. In no way is it fair, and it's going to create a have and a have-not situation. And when you have this in the times of extreme economic stress like we have now, then you're going to have problems. Going back to the article, this is an article by John Lott Jr., by the way. He says, because we saved up and behaved responsibly, President Joe Biden will punish us. Nor is his plan fair to those who don't go to college. And he starts out with, we put 5 children through college. 1 is still attending. We saved up. We never took out any loans as we didn't want our kids burdened with debt. Our kids went to William and Mary Washington, Dartmouth, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Pennsylvania. Really nice universities there. So far, the total cost for these colleges has been well more than $600,000. Last week, Biden forced taxpayers to assume nearly $6 billion in federal student loans for 560,000 borrowers. Oh, I missed that story. News stories announced the decision on forcing taxpayers to pay off the loans for others appears delayed until closer to the election. While some debt is likely to be paid off by taxpayers, Democrats will probably keep other borrowers locked in politically, but continuing to freeze repayments and warning that Republicans will end that. We should end that. We need to have people start paying back their loans. So Mr. Lott goes on to say, should my wife and I have just borrowed all of this money and sent our kids to public universities? If so, we could have had $600,000 to spend on all sorts of other things, nicer cars, nicer houses, or fun trips. Or we could have given that money our children and grandchildren to our children and grandchildren when they die. So it's 100% unfair, and that's exactly what Biden is trying to do. He's trying to put in all these gimmicks so that he can win in November. I personally don't think it's going to work. I personally think what's happening with inflation, gas prices, and the destabilization of the market, I think all of that is going to be more of a problem for Joe Biden in November. It needs to be more of a problem for Joe Biden in November, and also your local Democrats here in the state of Illinois. They're all part of the same cabal. They're all part of the same people that like to just spend other people's money on their pet projects, bail out people that they're cozy to, pretend like they're helping the poor when their policies are hurting the least among us, those least able to afford these inflationary times. So let's connect the dots here. Let's remember that 2 years ago, none of this was happening in the United States. None of it. This is entirely the result of Biden, Pritzker, you name it, other Democrat policies, Pelosi, Schumer, Lightfoot, all of them. They've all doubled down on really bad policy in the state of Illinois and in this country. And it needs to end on November 8th when we vote them all out of office. So thanks for listening to this segment. Back with more in a minute. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. In on my phone line here is Todd VanderMeide. Todd VanderMeide was previously the NRA lobbyist down in Springfield. He also represented firearms licensees. And he's been a friend for a long time, and he's really very familiar with all the Second Amendment issues. I first remember meeting Todd in 2013 as a brand new state representative when we were having to pass concealed carry legislation by court order. We only had 6 months to do it. So Todd was very good at letting us know all the issues surrounding that entire legislation, and he's been there to protect Second Amendment rights for a long time. Todd, welcome to my program. Thank you for coming on with me.
Good to be here, Jeannie.
Yeah, great. So
Nice to be here.
yeah, thank you. So it's been really remarkable because you've been able to provide a lot of clear insight into these gun laws that have been being trying to be passed in not just the state of Illinois, but at the federal level for years. I mean, I've heard you on multiple programs talk about these issues. So now, in the wake of the Uvalde incident and the Buffalo incident, where you had 18-year-olds commit mass murder, and in both cases, there were warning signs. In both cases, the police did not act properly. In both cases, none of the gun laws that I think are currently being proposed at the Senate level would have stopped what's going on. So let's just tick through a few of those and you give me your response to them. So first of all, they want massively new amounts of mental health money spent at the state and local level, at the school level even, to help combat some of this. So is that the issue? Is it a mental health issue that we have not been spending enough money on mental health?
Well, those human services programs were never my bailiwick, but it clearly shows these teenagers that have decided to shoot up schools or whatever, that there were warning signs, that there were, issues with animal abuse, or there were, they set up signals. And one has to argue that for them to be in such a dark place to commit these crimes, they do have a mental health issue. And the question is, how do you get the resources to the right places so that, they always say, if you see something, say something. But even when some of these individuals have been reported to the authorities and no action is taken, it was a systematic failure at several levels. So I think there has to be some more mental health goes along with, elementary schools and high schools and some of this stuff. But it goes to bullying. It goes to, remember there's always the cool kids and the ones who were, pushed out and they weren't the cool kids. And, there's a lot of things.
So I absolutely do agree with you. I my personal feeling, though, is in many cases we have a lot of money going forward for mental health services. And especially in the juvenile situation, we have a lot of emphasis on this from social emotional learning to school psychologists now to everything. I think that there are warning signs that are ignored. So I'm not sure that more money is the answer, but certainly a more emphasis and a more deeper look into that. When we're looking at that, another provision I'd like you to comment on is that now we are going to look as to whether or not 18-year-olds' juvenile records should be investigated prior to the purchase of a firearm, and taking a little bit longer if an 18-year-old wants to get a firearm, taking a little bit longer to look into that. Two comments. I want you to comment on that as a provision of itself. And then number two, what does this mean about expunging juvenile records, which the Democrats have always wanted to do immediately and automatically?
Right. So, number one, Illinois had a law that if a juvenile commits a crime that would be a prohibitor as an adult, it's a prohibiting factor for them. I think that that's one way to get at some of these juveniles who have had run-ins with the law. I think the darker side of this is that, so you're talking an investigative period. What they're really talking about is a waiting period.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so, how long is that going to go? When is enough enough? The current NICS system says that they've got 3 business days to deal with the records, and if there's no response issued, the dealer can go ahead and complete the transaction. And there are a number of these a year that come back that they should have been flagged, and ATF then has to go back and chase down the gun. But, when is enough enough? I mean, is 3 days not enough? Is it then 5 days? If it's not 5 days, is it 10 days? Where do you draw the line? Where does it stop? And if you're going to do that and say that these juvenile records are prohibitors, then you're going to have to give them a system somewhere down the line to seek an expungement. Not so much what we've seen with some of the Black Caucus issues and others where it's almost like it's erased immediately. But, Illinois allows for people to have their rights restored to be able to own a firearm. And the anti-gunners have fought that. So they're kind of at a dichotomy with what some of the criminal justice reforms want. But if you're going to do that at the federal level and make these prohibitors, then Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and others for years have stopped the funding of the federal relief program to where individuals could petition the courts and seek relief. And you're going to have that system. So I don't know how they're going to square it. But if there is just a flat-out prohibition without any chance of rehabilitation, then I think that's problematic.
Okay. So in that regard, the next provision they want to say is that you're going to have to wait till you're 21 to purchase weapons, and specifically anything like an AR-15.
So this is where, if the liberals didn't have double standards, they've had no standards at all. How is it that, elementary school children are wise enough to make decisions about gender and pronouns and things like that? How is it that a 14-year-old girl is wise enough to make decisions about her medical care and whether or not she needs to have a surgical procedure like an abortion without informing her parents?
Mm-hmm.
What is it to where I think, they were trying to get 16-year-olds to vote
Yes.
In Springfield not long ago. And so then you run up to, everybody always jumps to the 18-year-olds can join the military. I get that. I was one of those kids. But, I think you have to take all these other things in context. If they're going to argue that a teenager's brain is not sufficiently developed for them to be able to exercise the right to own a firearm, then what about all this other stuff? They're not competent enough to make those other decisions. So pick a lane, which is it?
Okay, other provisions included in this increased enhanced penalties apparently for straw purchasers or for firearms dealers that inappropriately sell a firearm. I mean, isn't that already illegal?
Straw purchasing is already illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I don't know. It's a 10-year penalty if you lie on a 4473 and purchase a firearm for somebody that, is ineligible. That's a straw purchase. Obviously, there's selective under enforcement because Hunter Biden lied on a 4473 buying a gun, and nothing's come out of that. So it's kind of like, what penalties are they talking about, and what are they going to do? Because those types of events are very rarely followed up on, if ever. So as far as the dealer aspect of it, if dealers are flagrantly and openly violating the law, that's a problem. There's a regulatory process that's been put in place since 1968. If they're just going to go out there and try to look for paperwork violations and just, make it harder for FFLs to operate, that's a different story. So none of the language has been released on any of this. So, as you know, the devil's always in the details
That's
about
right.
what the language actually says.
Okay, so the last provision that's probably one of the more problematic ones and one that we faced when we were in Springfield was red flag laws. So now currently 19 states have red flag laws, and they have various provisions in those. But they're trying to find a way to basically incentivize states to pass their own version of red flag laws by promising them additional resources, additional money in doing so. Now, red flag laws, again, in 2021, the U.S. Supreme Court declared them unconstitutional in a case that dealt with a Rhode Island man who basically his wife called the police and said, you need to take his weapons. They came in, they seized his weapons. Of course, that was a violation of also the Fourth Amendment, which is improper search and seizure. So red flag laws are fraught with problems, especially when you've got, an attorney general right now that basically wants to say that the biggest problems in the United States are moms going to their school board meetings and complaining about what's going on. So red flag laws, let's discuss that a little bit in terms of how you view it with your long history on Second Amendment issues.
I think they're ripe for abuse because you're trying to prove a negative. Mm-hmm. And you start off with somebody gets to make an anonymous or somewhat anonymous complaint. They run to court. You don't get a chance to defend yourself. You don't get notice. And then they get to swear out a warrant to confiscate your property. And then from there, you have to hire a lawyer and go to court to prove up a negative. And so I think you've got a whole host of issues. I think that you don't get to confront your accuser as the Sixth Amendment allows for. You don't get due process on the front end. You have to prove a negative. I think that those are all problematic within. And depending on what the Supreme Court says in the New York case that's pending right now, I think that, there could be some very, New York could pose some very problematic issues for red flag laws that don't address any of those issues. But the other part of red flag is, so they come in, scoop up the guns, you're a danger to yourself, and then what? They walk away. We've done our job. Yay, we confiscated these guns. What they don't do is they don't say, okay, now we're going to have a hearing to determine if you need psychiatric help. Do we need to get you into a program? Do you need counseling? What's the problem? There's none of that. It's just this individual is a danger to themselves or others, and we got to take his guns.
And we know the Buffalo situation. The Buffalo shooter actually was identified as having issues. It was actually put into a hospital situation for mental health issues, and then released. And if there ever should have been a red flag law presented, it would have been in that case. And New York has a red flag law, and yet he was able to purchase a weapon and then conduct mass murder.
Well, you're confusing two parts there. Red flag laws are somebody says something and makes a complaint that the individual is a danger to themselves or others. That's very different than having a mental health treatment and or diagnosis to where they become a prohibited person. And Illinois has a very broad and I think unconstitutional mental health law about what makes you a prohibited person. I don't think we want to see that kind of approach at the federal level. Because in Illinois, you land in a bed, you go get checked in for 24 hours. Without a doctor's diagnosis, you now become a prohibited person. And that needs to change. And I'm hoping that with this New York ruling, it'll give us the ability to change that to require a formal diagnosis and not some of this other just, you landed here, therefore. And not that, there's some finding.
Well, not to mention, on the topic of red flag laws, quite frankly, if you know that your son or daughter or, spouse or brother or whoever is actually exhibiting mental instability, I mean, wouldn't you just as a person ensure that they didn't have access to weapons to the fullest extent that you possibly could? Wouldn't you do that ahead of having to have a court come in and take them? I just see this as a family issue as well as a closely connected person issue. You would probably do that. Just if it happened in your own situation, you would take those guns away.
Right, and that's the way most reasonable people would act. The other thing you have to do is you can't make it so onerous on the mental health standard that you discourage people from getting treatment. if they generally fear that they're going to lose their rights and there's no chance of them getting their rights back, you're going to sit there and stigmatize the treatment, and people aren't going to want to go in. Look, we've got tens of thousands of veterans with PSTD. You know, and we don't want to scare them away from treatment. If they need treatment, then they should get it without being, you know, having
stigmatized.
to fear that they've been stigmatized, and the very Constitution they fought to defend is now they don't have the same rights, and there's a tightrope there. I'll admit and acknowledge that there's a tightrope and a balancing act to be done, but I think it can be done, and I just think, you know, it has to be done with a little bit of thought and all that. So.
Well, I actually think that if families were a little bit more proactive about what's going on in the lives of some of these children and young adults, that I think a lot of this would go away. So I think that the breakdown of the family, I think families not paying attention to what their kids are doing, looking at online, or anything else. I think that's a problem. Now, the bigger problem here is, as we talk about trying to solve for Uvalde incidences of mass murder, Buffalo mass murder, what's completely ignored to some degree is the everyday violence in the city of Chicago. The final total for last weekend was 8 killed, 31 wounded. And then you get a report like this from yesterday, published by NBC5 Chicago. More than 80 guns found in homes of individuals on electric monitoring this year. Now, you don't get on electric monitoring unless you're actually, arrested for a felony. So that's phenomenal. So these guys have access, even though they're sitting at home on electronic monitoring. There's guns all around them. And, of course, we know CWB Chicago, I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they keep a running total of the number of felons who then go back out and create additional felonies. And I don't remember what their total is at right now, but it's approaching 100 people, I think, in just the last year. So we've got a problem here.
And how many of those are going to be charged with and convicted of, you know, a Class 3 felony for a felon in possession? How many? You know, under the catch-and-release criminal justice system of Kim Fox, I doubt very few will actually be charged.
So the article goes on to say, of the 39 individuals rearrested after weapons were found in their homes, 27 were originally awaiting trial on electronic monitoring for weapons-related charges. I mean, that should be an automatic, you're sitting in jail and you're going to prison. So already
You're
charged
right,
with a crime of violence. We're going into houses and we're coming out with guns like this, said Sheriff Dart.
Yeah, and how many of those charges are going to be plea bargained away or tossed or whatever because they just don't have time to deal with it? I have zero faith in the criminal justice system of Cook County that they're going to do anything meaningful to put some teeth into it to show that they mean business.
Well, I have zero faith in the entire administration, going all the way up to the United States Attorney General, and what you've found with what them trying to do with wokeness in the military, and think that there's a bunch of white supremacists running around in uniform, which is not the case, and we're going to hyper target and monitor them. I don't have any faith in these folks when it comes to imposing some of these laws, like a red flag law, because I don't have faith in their judgment whatsoever. So I don't know where this bill's going to end up. It's unfortunate that 10 Republican senators have already signed on to it. I mean, I guess some of it's fine. You want to push more money to mental health, that's great. I don't know that more money's going to solve it. I think we've got deeper cultural and family issues that are the problem. But some of this other stuff, they are gradually taking away the rights of ordinary citizens by using a tragedy to force public policy that is not going in the end to solve the issue that they're trying to solve.
No, they Rahm Emanuel said never let a crisis go to waste. So this is the only way. This is their MO. This is what they do. So now it's going to be up to seeing what the United States Supreme Court does in this New York case and see if they won't put some teeth into their prior decisions that throw some handcuffs on this or throw some cold water on this.
Well, Todd, thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. Again, this is Todd VanderMeide, a former NRA lobbyist, a former lobbyist for firearms licensing dealers. So appreciate your expertise and coming on my podcast. Thank you so much for the interview, Todd. Okay, welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. And we are making this a Facebook Live too, segment 3, because there was just breaking news that came out, and that is that Caterpillar is moving its headquarters from Illinois to Irving, Texas. It's just shocking news. It's a real blow to Illinois to have such an iconic company as Caterpillar to be moving its headquarters out of the state of Illinois. And I'm reading from a Chicago Tribune article that just posted about this. And it says that it's going to move its headquarters, which is currently in Deerfield, to an office in Irving, Texas. The company said, "We believe it's the best strategic interest of the company to make this move, which supports Caterpillar's strategy for profitable growth as we help our customers build a better, more sustainable world." That's according to Caterpillar Chairman and CEO Jim Umpleby. That's what he said in his statement. The company will begin transitioning its headquarters in 2022. They're not waiting, folks. They're leaving now. They're out of here. Now, of course, they have many, many manufacturing areas around the state of Illinois. I was fortunate enough to actually tour their facility in Decatur, Illinois, when I ran for governor back in 2018. It's unbelievable what they are able to put together all under one roof. So that manufacturing will stay. And along with it, well over 17,000 employees, but they are moving their corporate headquarters. That says something. Now, remember, back only about 5 years ago, they moved their headquarters from Peoria to Deerfield. Now, within 5 years, they're making another move out of the state of Illinois. Of course, this comes on the heels of actually Boeing leaving and making that announcement earlier this year. If I can click on that article that I want to talk about. Yes, Boeing move is also we found out May 5th that Boeing was moving its headquarters out of Chicago to Northern Virginia. So, the loss of two of those substantial companies is really a threat to our economy, in my opinion, long term. The Center Square actually did a very good article just a week ago. 37 companies headquartered in Illinois are on the Fortune 500 list. 10 of those companies, though, are on the Fortune 100 list. Of those 10 companies, Caterpillar sits at number 3, and overall across the United States, they sit as 62. They're the 62 most profitable, not profitable, but companies with the largest revenue at over $53 billion in revenue a year. So it's a substantial loss to lose a company like that. Also topping out Illinois' top 100, it's Walgreens is the first one, and then it's followed by State Farm Insurance. Now, if you remember, there was this big hullabaloo about a decade ago because State Farm started to build a massive campus down in Texas as well. So you've got a lot of these companies just up and leaving in the state of Illinois. I guess it's to some degree, it shouldn't be a big surprise that they're leaving. The corporate headquarters like to be where the action is. And the action isn't necessarily in the state of Illinois. According to CEO Magazine, Chief Executive Magazine, let me see if I can find this one. Okay, here. Yes, according to Chief Executive Magazine, the ranking of the 2022 best and worst states for business, here's their ranking. This came out in April of this year. Texas, number 1. Florida, number 2. Who can guess? Number 3. Tennessee, number 3. What do all 3 of those states have in common? None of them have a state income tax. Arizona is number 4, and they moved up this year from last year. North Carolina sits at 5. Indiana, our slimmer, sexier state next door, Indiana, number 6 in terms of best states to start a business, to place a business. The bottom three: California, New York, Illinois. And Illinois has been sitting as third from the bottom in places to put a business for at least a decade, because that's how long I've been following the chief executive's rankings. So this is not really good news at all, folks. This is bad news for the state of Illinois when this is happening. And honestly, it could potentially get worse, and here's why. Because this November, on November 8th, you guys are going to make a decision on Amendment 1. Not a lot of attention has been put on Amendment 1, but Illinois Policy Institute had a very good story about Amendment 1. And Amendment 1 would basically enshrine permanent power for public unions in the state constitution. That will mean higher taxes, higher costs, and potentially costly litigation for business owners. So maybe they're moving out ahead of this. Maybe they see the writing on the wall in Illinois. I hope not, because we have a huge primary coming up in 2 weeks in the governor's race on the Republican side, and we have a huge referendum on the state of the state, the trend that is going to be Illinois' future for a generation to come in November. What is going to happen? We need to take a stand here. The Illinois Policy article goes on to talk again about Illinois' business climate, and in this case, they look at the Tax Foundation's tax climate rankings, and currently right now, Illinois' ranking is number 36 on the Tax Foundation's state business climate ranking, and that is down from 2017 at being at number 26. Now we're number 36. And of course, Indiana is, of course, number 9 in their ranking. Michigan's 12, Missouri's 13, Kentucky 18, Wisconsin 27. Iowa did come just below us at 38. That may change, in my opinion, though, based on the fact that Iowa now has gone to a flat tax instead of a progressive income tax, the opposite of what Governor Pritzker wanted us to do, and their flat tax is now lower than our highest flat tax. So, businesses is shifting. It's not a good sign that Caterpillar is leaving the state of Illinois. I just wanted to come out and talk to you live about this and let you know what's going on as you guys make further decisions on what to do in these important elections in 2022. So thanks for joining me on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. We're closing out segment 3, and thanks for joining me on a Facebook Live.